Right, good morning. My name's Christine Walls. I'm the PSFR examiner and I'm recording a series of webinars in relation to feedback on the PSFR exam in 2017 for the June sitting. Before I go in to look at the questions, which is what this webinar will do, there'll be a series of webinars recorded looking at the different questions that were on the paper and providing guidance to candidates about how to prepare a good answer and discussing the common mistakes that people made. I wanted to talk a bit about the exam marking process and the setting of a paper so that candidates will be better prepared for papers in the future. What I'm going to do is quickly open up a Word document and remind everyone how the paper's set. Those of you that have seen me teaching know I love my 6-column tables for PSFR. No different here when I'm talking about the subject. So, whenever I'm setting a paper, I obviously have to ensure I'm covering the syllabus fairly. PSFR has got 4 syllabus areas. The first one is essentially frameworks for financial reporting, all the information that's there about how accounting standards in general are applied, why accounting standards exist, issues like accountability, fund accounting, entity theory. That is worth 10% of the paper. Or we've got a 75-mark paper, 7 to 8 marks. Then we've got preparation of the financial statements. That's the big 60% element of the paper. That is worth, excuse me, just quickly totting up what that's worth. Those of you that know my teaching will also know that I'm not very good at mental arithmetic, let alone at 6 o'clock in the morning. So that's 45 marks. Then I've got my consolidation section. That is 15% of the paper, or around 11 marks. Then finally I've got my interpretation elements, which is also 15% or 11 marks. Now, when I think about the structure of the paper is set, obviously, as we know, with 20 multiple choice questions, 5 5-mark questions, and 2 15-mark questions. Now, there's some fairly obvious things that fall out of needing to cover the syllabus fairly and how I can then set questions. So, for instance, interpretation, which at the diploma level we'd expect to include some kind of evaluation and analysis, with 11 marks there. Falls nicely into the pattern of 2 5-mark questions, 1 multiple choice question. Now, it's not a given, of course, that each paper will have 2 5-mark questions on interpretation, but it's the most natural way to fit a paper across the syllabus. With our big preparation questions, well, two 15-mark questions easily cover a chunk of those 45 marks. What I tend to do in my preparation questions is I tend to steal a mark or two to cover consolidation issues. That then leaves me a 5-mark question to deal with consolidation, a couple of marks that I may have taken from a 15-mark question, and then the balance made up of multiple choice questions. In terms of my Syllabus A objective, that then falls nicely out into a 5-mark question and some multiple choice questions. Now again, with that 5-mark question, I can pick up on other elements of the syllabus, like preparation, to help balance out the paper. Now, I shall just fill in some headings. Now, of course, the other factor I have to think about is the coverage of the sectors and the coverage of the different types of statements. Within PSFR, our preparation section leads us to think about the statement of financial position, a statement of comprehensive income or comprehensive net expenditure, CBS, CIES if we were in local government, SOFA, balance sheet if we were in a charity. It also leads us to think about cash flow statements. With regard to setting questions, that falls nicely into the two 15-mark questions, one thinking about cash flow, one thinking about the revenue account balance sheet type activities. Now, in terms of my sectors, I have what I tend to term the major sectors. So by those, I mean local government, NHS Foundation Trusts, the supply side of central government, and charities. And I've got my minor sectors, education and housing. With my 15-mark questions, to get a fair balance across the paper, I would have to take these from two major sectors. Now, those could be any of the two. Charities, we don't have to prepare cash flow statements on the paper, but it could be local government, cash flow, charity, statement of financial position, a statement of financial performance, and balance sheet. Or it could be NHS central government, NHS local government, any combination. In terms of picking up on the smaller sectors, they really have to fall into these multiple choice questions or possibly a 5-mark question. Whichever major sectors I haven't covered in section B, in my 15-mark questions, I would then need to pick up on either 5-mark questions or multiple choice questions. So every time I'm writing a paper, I am ensuring there is coverage of all sectors across the paper, but I may do that in different ways. I think that's quite a crucial point for candidates to understand, because often candidates will focus very much on one sector, typically local government, hope that's going to be a 15-mark question, and when it's not, there's often a sort of struggle to realise and recognise and adapt to the fact that, well, actually local government is tested on this paper, but perhaps in ways you weren't expecting. And our analysis as we review the questions will show how I've actually tested government in some local government in some different ways. Now, before we dive in and start to look at the questions, I wanted to briefly talk about the marking process. Obviously, the results for PSFR this time were very disappointing. When I am marking a paper, a process has gone through that's consistent for all SIPFA PAQ papers, professional qualification papers. To begin with, my moderator and I initially test mark a sample of scripts. In that test marking process, we're confirming our understanding of the marking scheme. We're looking at perhaps areas where candidates have tackled a question in a different way than we had expected and are determining a consistent approach for how to mark that. I then go and first mark every script. Anything that is then marginal is second marked. Marginal means 45 to 52%. That second mark is done by or review mark is done by the moderator. And after that process, we'll agree a mark. That can involve a further discussion or a third mark. Anybody who tends to be agreed as a marginal pass stays as a marginal pass, obviously. If it's a marginal fail and the score is 48, 49%, we'll then go and look at what would happen if the best of both of our marks were awarded to a candidate. Would it then pass? So there's quite a lengthy process that goes through in terms of marking. My emphasis is always to try and pass people. It is not to try and fail people. A good paper for me is one that allows some candidates to shine, those that have really got the strength in financial reporting. So I always expect to get some people achieving above 75% in the paper, and that was the case in this sitting. A good paper, a fair paper to me, will also support those candidates who perhaps are not the world's best financial reporting people, but who have the core skills to become chartered accountants. As I look at questions, I'll explain more about what those core skills are, and a good paper should allow those candidates to pass if they have been well prepared and studied the materials, should allow them to pass on a sort of 50 to 55% pass. Another key question I ask when I'm marking is looking at the percentage of marginals. If a paper's on the hard side, I expect to see a high proportion of marginal scripts, be it marginal passes or marginal fails. This time around, we had an exceedingly low level of marginal scripts. The entire cohort of the exam was 74, and there were only 4 marginal scripts. I would normally expect around 20%, so normally expect about 15. The fact that I had so few marginal scripts didn't give me anything to play with in terms of feeling that the paper was particularly hard or unfair or time pressured or challenging compared to other sittings. Now that's the end of this introduction speech. What I'm going to do now is I am going to record a series of separate webinars looking at different questions that actually came up on the June paper. So please go and have a look at those and get some advice and tips for sitting this exam. Thank you very much.